All right. Welcome, everyone. Today is October 25th, 2022, and this is a scheduled committee meeting of the City of Topeka's Public Health and Safety Committee. We have learned that of our committee of 4, 2 of us are here live. The other 2 are not only remote but unable to attend today. So we will consider this a work session. The staff has all been on point to be here. We're going to go ahead and go through the agenda. I've sent word through Liz already to ask our 2 other members to view the tape of this session as soon as they can for input. I don't want us to get off schedule and appreciate the work that everybody's done to get us to this day. So with that, any questions about the arrangements or legal advice on that? All right, let's get started, and I will call the meeting to order. I'm Karen Hiller, I'm the chair. I represent District 1 and am co-leading our initiative on changing our cultural property maintenance with my colleague who will introduce herself.
Christina Valdivia Alcala, District 2.
Okay. Thank you for that. We have with us, I think, all the 2 people that were on the invite list. Just checking, do people know if Monique and Alan are coming? Okay, then I'm not going to wait for them either. We will therefore skip approving the October 14 minutes. Thank you, Liz, for getting them done in light speed. We will hold that to the next meeting when we are all here and move directly into our what I dubbed general calendaring for the committee for the remainder of 2022 and on into 2023. For those who are watching that have not been following our process, this committee has been focusing on changing our cultural property maintenance intensely this year on 2 tracks, a policy and procedures track and an action track. So what we are doing today, we've now had the end of season celebration for the mowing season with tremendous participation. We'll touch on that a little bit later, and we have had our final report from Karen Black on our policies and procedures track. So we are we're ready to pull that together. Just in short, there are 10 action tracks that the staff kept going while we were doing while the consultant was working. She has delivered 11 initiatives out in her final report. We will get to those for the bulk of the agenda today. We had been addressing issues of broadband, and as of our last meeting had concluded that broadband initiative is on its own and does not need to be on this agenda. The third issue that we have been addressing as a committee for the last few years, actually not just this year, was issues of homelessness. And again, that is addressing those issues is well underway with a variety of partners in the city. We decided that we should probably keep it on our agenda at least for once a year for a mid-year report. But we also are going to kick off the meeting with Corey Wright, who is our housing director, who has wants to brief us on the latest big development in homeless services, I think titled the Equity Access Shelter, but you can correct me and elaborate from there. So Corey Wright, take it.
Thank you, Councilwoman Hiller. Want to give you just kind of a brief update on our client track reports that we can pull out of HMIS. And so all of the social service agencies are entering into our homeless management information system. So it's easy for us to pull kind of what it looks like for the year. So from January until now, we have provided, or the community, not we, the city, the community has provided 46,307 services to individuals who are homeless. And so what that means is anything and everything that we provide. So food baskets, hygiene kits, utilities, rent, food, anything and everything that is tracked is considered a service. So as you can tell, that's quite a large number, and the dollar amount to that number is approximately $478,000 that has been used in our community since January to assist individuals and families experiencing homelessness. So we will continue to monitor that. That seems a little higher than what we would normally see at this time during the year. So we'll keep an eye on that.
Corey,
I also want,
could I
yes,
ask you a
ma'am.
quick question on that? Does that include housing subsidies or not?
Yes, it does. It does not include Shelter Plus Care. We enter that as in a program, and we don't put the rents in there because they change so frequently. So that's an additional 1.7 throughout the year that would be added to that. But they are in the system, just not the actual rent amount.
Thank you.
So we are working on trying to get an unduplicated count through our HMIS system. It's difficult. Our system does provide unduplicated count, but it's per agency. And so what we're seeing when we run the report is, 5,800 unduplicated clients, but that doesn't count for maybe a client that we see at the city that also has been seen at the Rescue Mission, Vallejo, or many of those other agencies. So we are working with our vendor to try to see if we can export that and release the dupes so we can see what that picture looks like. So we are actively working on that and excited about the opportunity to be able to provide that to the committee and the community. So with that, I will say we have the Equity Access Shelter. You nailed it. That is the name of the new initiative that was brought to our attention by Councilmember Valdivia Alcala. We are stoked about this program. We can't be more excited in our division. The community seems to be 100% on board. This is a really collaborative effort to provide the community with a single point of access and also just partnering better with our community. So more details, I don't want to go into too much details, more details a week from today, November 1st in the Holiday Conference Room at 1 p.m. We'll have some refreshments. We welcome everybody to come. This is a really systematic change to how we've been doing things over the past several years. So again, we are super excited about this and want everybody to come to that, please.
Well, it sounds like Councilwoman Valdivia is already fully familiar. I know I've got a conflict. I was planning to come, so I'm thinking, okay, am I going to have to read about it in the newspaper? Or look for handouts? That's okay if you need to not leak any details. But it is a combination of a central point for services plus additional housing. Can I ask that much?
The concept is really a single point, and we will give like specific details. We don't want to go too far in because we're not quite there yet, but
Okay.
specific details we will have November 1st, and I can reach out to you directly, Councilwoman Hiller, if you're unable to make sure you understand all the aspects of it.
Well, thank you for that. I'm sure there will be others as well, or that just missed it and want to see afterwards. So it's exciting. Councilwoman.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been in the works now for over a year, and myself and Spencer, Deputy Mayor Spencer Duncan, will be there on November 1st. And thank you to Corey and her staff. In any way that I can help moving forward, Corey, to help educate communities, NIAs, anything of that nature, because I think that what we're really going to need to focus on is getting the word out into community that is not homeless, that is really seeking change within the city. And we know that this can be, one tool to help alleviate that. So have told Corey that we're behind it, and Spencer has, graciously come on board with this as well. And so we're excited, and thank you for all the hard work.
It's been exciting to see just the public exchange of what's housing first, what's the concept that you knew of? That you
Built for Zero?
Built for Zero, and the community coming together, listening to one another, I guess, and then coming together and looking into these resources. If I can ask one other question, And Corey and I worked on a case just this week of a woman who was formerly homeless. So she's not today. Would any of those services and that syncing of services be available to folks that were at risk or formerly homeless as well?
Yes, it will be a single point for all of those individuals in that situation. So yes, this would be something we could use to assist that individual.
That's great.
I'm trying not to spill all the beans. Gretchen's gonna get mad at me if I tell everything.
Well, hopefully nobody's watching our committee, right? We'll find out. No, that just to be prepared, because Christina's right.
People at the press conference from all the agencies that I spoke to, and I just can't even express like how everybody's on board, and this is such an amazing thing. So thank you, Councilmember Valdivia, for bringing it to us, and we are happily going to run with it and make it do good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any questions for anybody else who's on the call? Okay. With that, thank you again, Corey, and we will move on in our agenda. Our agenda item number 4 is the policies and procedures track of the Changing Our Culture Property Maintenance. And the first item on there is, again, making reference to Karen Black's report being delivered directly to the council last Tuesday, the 18th. We invited the council, as well as anybody else, to please get us any questions or comments before today. I think my request was by last Friday, but Monday at the latest. Either Hannah, Liz, do we have any comments, or anybody really? Questions or comments that have come in from staff or council or the public?
I have not received any. I don't know if Liz has.
Some came in.
Chairwoman, I have also not received any, other than there were a few changes in your packet, but I don't know if that was exactly feedback to the Karen Black presentation.
Councilwoman.
I think the governing body as a whole received one from the Historic North Topeka West NIA supporting what was presented. Additionally,
Good point.
I think that there was Habitat for Humanity was very supportive of it as well. And I think that there was Ms. Shamika also was supportive of the initiative and sent it to the entire governing body. And of course, you know, we were very aware of the support of council when it was presented, so.
Okay, well, we wanted to make sure and offer that so that we had all the input we could get before we get going. The plan is that, Hannah, do you want to, this is no pressure, just a progress report. Hannah Ulrich, who's been on special assignment to help us lead staff this, has been working with Karen Black. You two are...
So we've gone back and forth with initial draft of some of her tasks and action items under each of the 11 steps, trying to work out the format, what information do we need, what teams are on it. We are working to set up a meeting to chat about it more on Friday, and then hopefully we'll be able to have something put together to share with the larger group next week.
That's great. The idea there is that the last piece of Karen Black's contract was to do the action plan. There was a framework in it for everybody who saw in the report that talked about the different initiatives and what kind of priority they were. And beyond that was to do the action plan. So when she finishes that, obviously they've already got the progress report from how the 10 projects that everyone was working on here were going. To factor, then we will work on blending those two so that when we meet in December, which is, I am thinking that would be the next time this committee meets. We may meet in November for the next item that we're talking about if we're ready to move something and can't do it today. But the thought was give people some time to work on all these things in November and schedule a meeting for this group in December, at which time, before then, hopefully, by the end of November, we'll have that consolidated action plan. And instead of getting an agenda that's this long, we'll have an attachment that's got our progress tracker on it, and we'll be able to all start checking boxes off, right?
Absolutely.
Don't know if we've thanked you enough. Appreciate your help and leadership with the staff and with us in terms of keeping this together and moving it forward.
No problem.
Okay, well, if we get any straggle comments, that's fine. We're sure to get some later, but at least we'll be moving on everything that we had today. Nothing goes on the shelf with this committee, right? We're just pulling stuff back off the shelf, making sure we didn't forget anything. Okay, next, action items to address today. Let's just check all three of them right now because I had listed LLC separately from municipal court costs and fees, but in fact, that's one consolidated proposal.
It is not. There are two separate ordinances in your packet.
Okay,
There should be. But I'll walk through them both and explain it all to you if
Okay.
you would like me to.
and then just to peek ahead for a second, the retaliatory eviction ordinance is not ready to go today.
No, that'll be
So
ready
our deep
for your-
dive is in this.
Correct. So it'll be ready for consideration in November.
Okay, and I know that I heard from Mike a little bit earlier, just so I know. Are you wanting to bring forward the redraft of the letter as part of this discussion, or later?
I'm trying to figure out how to answer that question. So as part of this specific, the LLC portion and the,
And the municipal court costs and fees?
no, it was a letter that you asked to have done by today.
Okay.
So it's here.
Okay, well, we'll do it later. I've confessed to Amanda already. I mean, I thought the LLC thing was just court access, and when I realized how pervasive what's being proposed today was to all of our procedures, I thought, ooh, which is okay. I just didn't realize it was that comprehensive.
I will happily walk through it all for you.
Okay, you can stay here if you want, or
I'm the only one here, so.
go ahead. You might have some things to say. Okay.
Okay, well, if you are ready, we'll start with what we've called the LLC ordinance. So as some historical background, this,
I want to make sure first that I have what you're talking about in front of me.
it's titled, introduced by City Manager Stephen Wade concerning procedures for prosecuting International Property Maintenance Code violations in municipal court, amending Topeka Municipal Code 2.40.
Okay. You have yours? Okay.
Okay, it's about 15 pages long, so. So as some historical background, this ordinance, the idea for it came about last year. At the end of the year, if you remember, we were dealing with quite a few out-of-state landlords. A problem that we run into that is not Kansas specific, it is nationwide, is that oftentimes out-of-state landlords get the summons to appear to municipal court. They say, oh, that's city court, I don't need to worry about that, and they just don't show up. And unfortunately, the issue that you currently have without the adoption of this type of ordinance is our only mechanism when someone chooses to simply ignore our rules and not come to court is to arrest them. Well, it's hard to arrest an LLC, their company. And so we have lots of laws that protect corporations, individual partners, so you can't just go say, well, you're the primary shareholder, we'll arrest you. It doesn't work quite like that. And so we have been really struggling with this issue, and we did a lot of research across the nation, like surely someone has fixed this issue, right? Weirdly enough, no one else has really fixed this issue yet, so we said, okay, there has to be a solution. So we started looking through Kansas statutes, and there's a statute from the 1970s that allows a process for bringing corporations into court. And so what we have done is replicate that state law at the local level. So that's the overarching LLC portion. As you stated, there are some pieces about administrative hearing, which I'll go through as we get to those, because those also deal with court and some timing issues that we needed to fix. And since we are opening up the law, it was a good time to do that. So if you start on page 1, the first changes you'll see is in section 1. When it's a new addition, it's the underlined. When it's struck through, it's a deletion. So this is your definition section. This makes clear that a legal entity is responsible for the acts of its agents. So if your property manager of your apartment complex is doing something, then you're responsible for it. It also makes it clear that we have the authority to prosecute you for violations of our city ordinances. And then we define what an agent is so that it's clear exactly who can appear on behalf of the corporation. If you move through, the next changes on page 3 defines what a legal entity is. This is all pretty standard definition languages from civil code, criminal code in Kansas. A legal entity is a business, trust, corporation, limited partnership, limited liability company, and a foreign covered entity as defined by Kansas law. We define resident agent at the bottom of number 3. That is important because we need someone to serve process on a corporation. So the resident agent is who we typically use in Kansas. And then if you move to page 4, Q, a show cause order is defined because that is how we are going to get these corporations into court. So you got to define what that is. So moving down to section 3, that's where you're going to next see the changes. Most of this is our current ordinances that talks about how you get a notice of appear, you show up in court. Well, as we stated, we need someone to serve notice of appears on for LLCs. So this states that if you're a legal entity, the notice of appear shall summon an agent of the entity. So we aren't summoning the business themselves, we're summoning an agent to come appear on behalf of the business and explain why they have. If you move to page 6, that's the next, this is where we get into the truly substantive changes. This sets up the process that will be new to our municipal code. So it says, if you are a legal entity, we're going to serve you a notice of appear on your resident agent, or we're going to leave it with a manager of the partner. This is all very standard service mechanisms from civil law in Kansas. Businesses will be very familiar of it. So that talks about how we're going to serve you notice that you need to appear in municipal court. So then we move on to page 7, and this is where it talks about what happens if the person we have served it on does not appear. So A is current law, that's if you don't appear, if you're a regular person, then a warrant is served for you, but B is the new addition. So if the accused person is a legal entity and they fail to show, the court will then issue a show cause order to the resident agent. And what that show cause order says is, hey, we meant it when we sent you that summons that said you needed to appear in court. Show up and show us why you did not appear. Show cause. Come show us why you didn't show up. So if, hopefully, they get their show cause order and they show up to court and things go on. But let's say they do not get the show up to court. So what this allows us to do is if they ignore our summons, they ignore our show cause, the court can proceed to what is known as a default judgment against them, so they can proceed with trial and adjudicate them guilty in their absence. This is a very common mechanism in civil law. It is a mechanism, as we stated, under state law for criminal law. It has not been done at the local level in Kansas, as far as I can tell. It also has not been done anywhere else. So it will be innovative, but we have ran through all of the chaps, both at prosecution level, municipal court level, district court level, to make sure all of these steps are going to work. And the goal is that it shows our corporations, our out-of-state landlords, that we're serious about this. If you don't want to come to court, fine. If you're guilty of your offense, we'll find you guilty, and then we'll assess those fines and fees against you. If they ultimately don't pay, you can send them to collections. You can do those things. So the idea being, you get found guilty by not showing up once or twice, perhaps you'll start to take it seriously and come to court and show why you were not guilty of this offense or why you are, and hopefully we can get you into court. So that is the LLC portions of it. Continuing on page 7, the next section is section 6. So it says appeal to district court. So one of the other issues that slows down administrative actions, such as demolition orders especially, is that under Kansas law, when an administrative hearing order orders the demolition of a vacant building, for example, you have the right to appeal that to district court. We can't take away that right of appeal. You have that right of appeal. However, state law just says you have a right of appeal, and the time frames of that, how long you have to protect that appeal, have to be set by the local level. We've never done that. So right now what can happen is I could file an appeal of my demolition order against my house and then just let it sit over in district court and never do anything to perfect that appeal. And then as a city, we can't do anything either because you filed, so we're in hold mode. So that doesn't make a lot of sense as we're trying to deal with demolition orders or other administrative. So on page 7 in section 6, 8, and 9, what you'll see is we are setting in place those timelines for appeal to the district court. These are very standard in Kansas City's. We just never done it at this Topeka level before. So now if you miss your deadlines, you file your appeal, you don't follow the deadlines that we put into the statute, then we can proceed with demolition because you've never perfected your appeal and file a motion to dismiss and be done with it. So that's what 6, 8, and 9 do. Each of those are different hearings, sections of our code. So it's identical language in each of the sections. One section deals with demolition of houses, one does for property, other issues like abatement of grass. And then the last one is our general catch-all section for administrative hearing officers such as parking. So that is what you will find in section 6, 8, and 9. And then the last section is section 7. So if you turn to page 8 that we have not addressed, this was a recommendation that came out of Ms. Black's report. It's also been talked about by council for quite a while, or at least since I've been your city attorney in the last year, about habitual offenders. The landlord that continues to have the same problems over and over and over, and you find them guilty. This would put in a habitual violator offense for those kind of entities, so the housing violator, to rack up the penalty. So if you've been found guilty of a housing violation 2, 3, 4 times, then your penalties get stricter. So this is a way to make people take their housing offenses seriously. And that is the entirety of what we've deemed the LLC ordinance, and I am happy to stand for any questions. I know there's a lot to digest there.
There is. I'll kick it off. I had a question struck me while you were talking that I hadn't thought of when I looked at it before. That's what worries me about. I have to sleep on stuff. Anyway, with these changes, one of the things that has been discussed is the issue of service of out-of-town owners of any kind. Does that solve?
This does help your out-of-state landlords, your out-of-state entities, because it allows you to serve on their registered agent. Any business that is operating in the state of Kansas is required by law to have a registered agent served at the Secretary of State's office. This allows those corporations, we can serve them on their registered agent who has to be listed in Kansas and not go find them in Oklahoma or other places. If you were just an individual citizen, we would still have to serve process out of state. It wouldn't help with an individual citizen. If they were in Hawaii, for instance, we'd still have to serve them in Hawaii. But for businesses at least, which is the bulk of the out-of-state service of process issues, yes, it does help with that.
Because it has seemed in the past that when, as we talked about these registry ideas and this and that for the most part, those individual owners, and we do find and we do have contact with.
But those
Not all of them,
out-of-state
I
businesses
suppose,
are the issue most of the time. So.
Good. I mean, 2 birds. I have a couple of technical questions. One of them is, do we need to add in the definitions a definition for person and make it clear that persons include legal entities? Because what I found was your form still just says person, the section 8.7 to 5.030 on service that only talks about persons. But if we could define person as including a legal entity, it might solve all those issues.
I don't know that you have to, because in C, that is where you have defined that a person who violates the ordinance on behalf of the legal entity is legally responsible. But we can definitely look at that and see if it's needed or not, and make sure that we don't have it anywhere else in the code.
I just was, in trying to sort this out, I saw.
So person is pretty well defined under Kansas law as any individual business, anything under the sun, thanks to Supreme Court precedent.
Well,
that
maybe
makes
even making reference to
businesses
Kansas
people.
law, which we've tried to do over time as we've streamlined the code. I just wanted to make sure we weren't leaving any gap because other things just say person and we.
I will double check. I am pretty sure it is very clear in Kansas and U.S. Supreme Court law that once we expanded persons to include companies, that it was everything. I think that's the Citizen United decision, but I will double check.
I'll follow that up by saying, of course, with a career in educating people about the law and trying to have the law be clear, have it be written for people so they could read it and know whether it applied to them or not. You know, I don't want to use new language. If what we should do is reference language about a definition of person that's in state law, but make sure that
I will look into it and see if we need a definition.
I think could be helpful. The other, thank you for answering a couple of my questions. On page 11, and the language that's in D carries over from what was there before, so this is not an observation of something new, but isn't the administrative hearing officer affirming, modifying, or reversing decisions of the code official upon a determination as to whether those four examples, whether it was served correctly, whether it was correct in the law, whether there really wasn't any alternative but to do what the code. It seems like a determination that is the incorrect.
Well, this is current law, so this should be what our administrative hearing officers are following, is the current law. If you would like to change it, we could, but
Well, it
this
just
is
seemed like what they're
current law.
doing to me, and if I wasn't tracking it all the way through, okay, again, this is reading it as the person who's trying to figure out what's gonna happen if I go, is that the charge of the administrative hearing officer is to decide whether or not the notice was served in accordance with TMC 8.6, blah, 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 whether or not the provisions apply, whether or not the code official did a correct interpretation, and whether or not the requirements could be satisfied, rather than just determining that they can, which is how I read it.
Well, that language means that they're supposed to affirm, modify, or reverse, so it doesn't matter whether or not it says whether or not, that's what
Okay.
they're doing, so
Okay.
what you're describing is what that says.
Seemed contradictory, that it says they're supposed to do that, but then it says they're confirming. That was just reading it as,
Yeah, they're affirming, modifying, or reversing the decision, is what the language in D on 11 says.
well, I think those are the only things I caught at the time, that concern about, because these other things say person.
I will happily double check that and see if we need a definition.
Councilwoman?
I have nothing. Thank you.
Questions, concerns?
No, thank you.
Anyone in the audience? Mike, you have any?
I want to thank Amanda and her staff for actually addressing this, because it's been a huge issue for us, especially LLCs who have realized that I can't touch them, that have elected not to abate their properties and clean things up. And we're just cleaning them and billing them, and then some of them are dismissed because we're not notifying a human being. So this cleans it up, and I appreciate it greatly.
I know you can't vote because you don't have a quorum, but if you would like to request that we put this on the next council agenda, we're happy to, or we can hold it longer.
Nervous about, we only have 2 meetings in November anyway, right? I don't know how full those agendas are at this point, especially with,
I think the city manager had penciled in a spot for this. This is truly an issue. We've been dismissing LLCs for a year.
I
So
know. And I know you wanted, that's why I put it on this agenda to move it if we could. Do you know which?
I believe, Hannah can correct me, but I thought it was penciled in for the first meeting in November that the city manager had scheduled time for it.
Yes, the legal entities Muni Court is on the action agenda.
Well, we can certainly get concurrence from the other two. I want to make sure we I wanted to make sure as a committee, honestly, that we had, I sent you some questions earlier and I'd like you to walk through it just so that we as a committee understood what kind of impact this should have, really. And you addressed it generally, but so that we could share that with the council as part of the committee's consideration and recommendation.
So I guess for some additional background, currently when an LLC is formed, we spend significant staff time trying to find people to serve because we can't just serve the registered agent, having them not show up, then having it come to court, grant a continuance to hope that you get them, send them more letters, try to convince a principal agent to come, try to convince a landlord's managing of the apartment to come. Ultimately, if no one comes, we dismiss the case and nothing happens to these offenses. And this has been going on for years, as Mike would say. Obviously, you have to move at whatever speed you would like to move, but this is a significant staffing issue.
What page are you've also, though, substantially changed the fines in this, the repeat
That's the
violator.
habitual violator portion. And that was, like I said, a recommendation that habitual violators, the ones that continue
No,
to
and
have
I get that.
housing.
What page is that on of our?
Page 8, or
Packet?
sorry, 9. It's page 9.
Okay.
So.
Again, that was something that we hadn't talked about at all. We had talked about creating a system whereby the habitual violators would be disincentivized, let's say, for letting that happen, and that we would be creating a support and reward network on the other end for people who really, and a community support network for those who couldn't. And so I felt like just a little more, I can see this as targeting the LLCs, but we as a group all of us have a responsibility of thinking of all of the potential violators. You have the most experience with the up and down the line, whether it's the lady who can't get her house painted the average person who can't get their house painted in 4 months, somebody who needs time into a second year, because that feeds into what goes to an administrative hearing and what goes to court. And I will tell you that honestly, as much as I've been involved in it, I end up as a council person involved at that literal and figurative grassroots level of when somebody's been written up and has questions about it. And I often I'm not privy to, the comparison. I'm sure we have the numbers in the report either, but this brings it together. Who goes to admin hearings and why? And if it's just on their request or if they get sent ever, and then when does it advance from the admin hearing to court? And I'm assuming that this
Habitual violator only deals with people that have been convicted. So if someone paints their house, even if it takes 3 continuances, our goal is compliance. We generally dismiss that. They're never convicted of that offense.
But
so
again, and I'm looking at what I thought was our shared goal of pushing this stuff down so that we don't have as many that go to court. So we don't have as many that go to administrative hearings because theoretically, there's a better safety net and also people know there's consequences so they don't want to go there. Yet we have figured out a system, ideally to me, at the inspector level and at the PMU level of being able to give adequate time fairly to those involved to get the work done. And just making sure we've got that interface in mind.
I don't think those are mutually exclusive goals.
I don't either.
My question would be, this may not be speaking to exactly what you're talking about, but wouldn't the housing navigator have some role in dialing that back from what you're concerned about with the little old lady that can't afford it or doesn't have the ability to do it or the help to do it, to help steer that away from this?
Well, partly though, it has to do, those bump up the level because you all have settled on an internal threshold at which you send it out of your unit to to a higher level. And actually, that's I just needed to refresh and clarify on that because if you were going to change your procedures to allow either inspectors or yourself to give more time so that they don't get to court at all. I mean, I don't know if you follow.
I think those are two separate conversations. There's the whole they never get to court, which the goal is you never get them to court. So then if you do have them in court and they continue to be violators, this sets up stricter penalties. We can also take this out of the ordinance completely if you're ready on the rest and leave this. But I think the goal is you never get them to court. So then if they're at the court and they continue to have problems, you have higher fines.
And that's why I asked about you all to do sort of a narrative on how you saw what's been happening lately change with this going into place, in terms of the volume of folks or how you addressed giving people time to do what they need to do. Is that better?
I'm going to try to respond and follow what you're saying.
Okay.
So when it comes to giving time, we will give a person as much time as long as they're doing the job. Or they explain, they say, I can't do the roof for 6 months, and my contractor's coming in 6 months. We contact the contractor says that's a fact. We will give them that time. Many cases, a person says, I'll do it when I'll do it, and I'll get it done when I want to get it done. And then they will speak to you or another council member with a completely different version of how the story went. Mm-hmm. And they say, look, I wasn't given fair enough time. But when we contacted them, they said, I'm going to do it in my time. Then we send that one to court. But
Okay.
I have in the policy that an inspector can give one extension, and then they have to come to me to ask for additional extensions and do that for accountability, as I had found years back, that there are certain properties that got an extension after an extension because it was a difficult case and the inspector didn't want to deal with the difficulty of it. So we changed the policy that they got to come to me and explain why they want to give a second, third, or fourth extension. They show the documented evidence, they show the communication, and then I approve it. I don't think I've denied any single one that has come to me, or if I have, it's been so rare that I can't remember. So I would rather have not a single property go to court. The ones that go to court are the ones that don't comply with what they agreed to do or won't respond to us, because we're calling these people now saying, hey, your case is coming up, because we have to find a solution regarding our staffing and the load calls that we have. And so one of the efforts is talk to these people, get them to comply so we don't send them to court or we don't abate it. And so there's a lot more communication going on with the people that are being cited. How it's expressed after we talk to them, I can't control.
Please understand, it's not a complaint on my
Sure.
part. And we get, what I know is that I get anecdotal information. I know how to read through some of that too. So it was just to refresh on just how much flexibility you have to work with what appears, at least at first, to be a willing owner, and we're going to add in, if they need help, can you already refer them to, for instance, Corey and her folks, if there's money available to help with rehab? and
Absolutely.
things like that, to beef that up. You all are good about that, as far as I know.
Yes.
So who gets into the administrative hearings? When does that happen, and why?
Administrative hearings occur when they request a hearing because they disagree with the code. For whatever reason, in those the four that you read out, that they feel that anybody who asks for a hearing gets a hearing. We do not deny a person a hearing, even if their argument doesn't fit into that category, those four categories. We still allow them to make their presentation to the hearing officer. So it's anybody who asks for one, and anyone who is in the process of a demolition. If we go after your property to demolish, we set up hearings, and you got to go through a whole process of hearings before we take the step of demolishing the house.
Just to make sure you knew and blah, blah, blah.
We're taking somebody's property and turning it into rubble, so yes. And I mean, it's fulfilling the legal requirements as well. But any individual that doesn't ask for hearing, we're not setting for a hearing.
So if they do have an administrative hearing officer hearing, that's just a one and done event. It's not the administrative officer that's ever giving them extensions.
No, the administrative officer also does that, and frequently that's where we get a timeline. You inquired in an email about timelines for people.
Right.
So a person will go, this is overwhelming for me. I can't fix the 42 problems. So the administrator goes, what I want you to do is I want you to go home, I want you to write out a plan of action, I want you to bring it back, and then if the inspector and me agree with it, we will continue to bring you back to the hearings every 60 days, 30 days, whatever they agree upon, to see the progress of what's going on.
And in terms of this document, is the administrative hearing considered court or something different?
No, you have two different tracks. You have an administrative hearing track.
Right.
And you have a municipal court track. You can run through them simultaneously, you can run through them different, totally depends on the process. If you have an immediate issue that needs addressed right away, maybe you aren't gonna go through months long of this versus this. It just depends on what you gotta do. This document deals with LLCs in court, but also deals with administrative hearings, setting timelines for when they appeal to district court. It doesn't do anything to change how many continuances an administrative hearing officer can give. It doesn't change that portion. It simply sets up timelines so that when they've appealed that decision to district court, how long they get to appeal it.
And I'm asking some of these questions to clarify for me, but the two guys that are on the committee that aren't here deal with this far less than we do, and as well as the public. And I want to do my best to draw out what these layers are to refresh everybody so that we really are confident when we go in
So
to
I guess
council.
your question is like, yes, administrative hearing does involve court because they can appeal that to district court,
But
not
district
municipal.
court, just so people know, is going over across the street to the
Yes.
county, taking it to a state court. That's not an appeal
Correct.
to our court. It's
Correct, but
taking
we
it
can-
out of our city system at that point.
Yes, but we have to, as a city, set the timelines that you have to go to district court, which is why it's in this ordinance.
Understood. Just want to make sure. So this would also drive the ones, some of the local mom and pop LLCs that have lots and lots of violations, but it turns out that that's because their tenants are supposed to do the mowing, the tenants aren't doing the mowing, the landlord's not worried about it, and they'll probably need to worry about it a little bit more if it's going to come back on them if there's multiple, even just mowing violations. Right?
Correct. And so
Or
when you,
plugged down.
when you talk about prevention, one of the ways the habitual violator ordinance does allow prevention is if you are a chronically bad landlord that comes to court and says, oh, I don't care about that, I got the first violation, but then you come back and you're getting convicted for your second or third time, your penalties go up. And if you know that and you say, oh, well, it's not just gonna get dismissed, or I'm not gonna get a $10 fine, the third time it's a minimum of $500, perhaps you take that more seriously before you get the third offense.
That was why I wanted you to talk about it, because it would seem that, you know, if what we'd observed was that the fees and even court costs were being waived for people that were chronic offenders, if you built this in, theoretically,
You would
that,
still have to be found guilty, so we try to really work with everyone. So if you are an individual that's trying to paint your house and you fix it, we're going to dismiss that charge. You're not found guilty of it. So you wouldn't have a first conviction. But if you are an out-of-state landlord that's like, I'm not gonna show up and we find you guilty, the second and third time, you are gonna have more penalties. If you're an individual that's like, I live here and I still don't care, and you get convicted 3 or 4 times, you also would have higher penalties. But those are not your people that are striving to fix their house.
just double checking on that as well, but it would seem that the first time that non-negotiable fine hit.
You would take it more seriously, one would
Exactly.
hope.
Exactly. Any more questions, comments, suggestions from anyone who's here? Okay, let's go on to this next one.
Okay, the second one is municipal court costs. It's the one that's got a fancy grid on the front page. It should be in your packet from Liz. And so this came out of a recommendation of Ms. Black's report. She talks a lot about how we are not getting any court costs off those that we dismissed because they
Can you
were.
hang on just
Yep.
a second?
It's not in my packet.
You came in this later one, the handout from last week. Packet. Oh,
Mike
got
has an extra
one.
copy. So.
Just happened to bring it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
So, for some reason, this has gotten left on like 2 weeks in a row, I guess. So,
Well, I think I didn't, and I will take some responsibility for that. I did not realize there was a second piece.
Ms. Black's report talks a lot about how you need to somehow recoup the costs from people who come to court repeatedly and ask for extension after extension. Currently, under our municipal court code, we only assess court costs for guilty pleas, pleas of no contest, or for forfeiture of your bonds, or if you're found guilty by the judge in a trial. So we, unlike lots of other big cities in Kansas, currently only charge when you're actually found guilty or you plead guilty. Cities like Wichita charge even if you bring it in and you get your case dismissed. So for example, let's say I parked in the handicap spot and I forgot my handicap placard. I got a ticket, I went into municipal court and I said, here, I'm really handicapped, really got my tag, and they dismissed the ticket. We don't charge court costs on that. Places like Wichita do charge court costs on that. But one of the recommendations of Ms. Black was that we need to come up with a way to recoup some of those costs for the people that come in and ask for extension after extension. And so she recommended that we do charge court costs for dismissal of property maintenance violations when they are cured by owner. And so on page 3, that is where the bulk of that changes is in E. It's that recommendation from her report that states that it doesn't require a guilty plea if you fix your paint after 6 months and we dismiss it because it was cured by owner. We can assess court costs on that. However, we are very concerned at the city about equitably and not finding people because they are poor, and really making sure that we're adequately helping our population base. So we have recommended a modification to that says that the judge can waive those upon a finding of manifest hardship. That comes from state law. So if you are truly indigent and you didn't paint your house because you couldn't afford to and you cannot afford to pay court costs, our municipal court judges have the right to waive that fee upon a finding that it would cause a manifest hardship on you. But if you're an LLC owner that decided you were going to wait it till the last minute and finally fix your thing after you've come to court 5 times, we could assess court costs against you. So we tried to find an appropriate balance. We thought that was very important to us in the legal department and the city as a whole.
And this again drove my question earlier, if maybe you answered it earlier, but if we just keep those poor people out of going to court at all, it's better, right? But we know that the threat of something happening has galvanized action that otherwise wouldn't have happened. I know that, so I'm not trying to trick you into saying
No,
something.
it's a hard question because the people have the money and the ability to fix their property. Councilwoman Valdeva Alcala pointed out when she looked at her district versus other districts, the amount of code cases that were sitting there were huge compared to those. Equal amount are being written within those 2 areas. But this area, the people have the resources to fix them, so they fix them. In her area, you have either the people that can't fix them, the landlords that won't fix them, or the people that just have bad habits and they're not fixing them. So it's a bigger issue than that. And to provide an opportunity like a hardship request is a good thing, especially if we're requiring them to demonstrate they truly have a hardship. Because many walk up there and claim poverty that we don't know if they are or not. So, but we have to respect it. That whole thing with, I'm gonna mess up the name, but a housing counselor is a pretty big deal. I proposed that 3 years ago. I called it a counselor. I said we should have a counselor that deals with these code cases because they're gonna walk back out and they don't have the resources, and many of them don't have even the capacity mentally to understand the whole concept of what they gotta do. Or to where a counselor could sit down and guide them to all of the right resources and also beyond code enforcement. Because many of these things aren't property maintenance issues. They are just public health issues that they're going through. So I think this is a great thing that we're moving forward with it. I got the name wrong, the housing counselor.
Navigator.
Housing navigator. It is something that's been needed for a long time, and I'm glad that it was recommended and that's being pushed forward. But that'll help keep those people that you're talking about that you don't want in court. That'll help them. They got to go to court most likely to get there. But once they get there, they have the support. you have to keep that case somewhere. But if we're able to intercept them before, an example, we send out the housing case and we send out
Right.
the information, and they say, hey, I think I qualify, that housing navigator may be able to do it before we get to court. We gotta wait until we create the housing navigator to give you an accurate answer of where that's gonna happen. Because it sounds great to say before court, we might find out that legally it's not the best way to do it. I don't know.
Well, what happens is those individuals get a criminal complaint on their record. And what happens, and we've talked about that in terms of other things as well. And so then when they're trying to get other housing, people check court records and find out that they have criminal complaints. And so that, whether it's a housing thing or whether it's a credit thing, that's harmful to people just because they're poor or a little disoriented or unable to manage their own affairs. And as much as we can not send them to court, that would be my preference if they need help.
And it appears that when we work that out with the housing navigator, that we will be able to have two options. One, to make it to court that didn't reach out for help, and once they get to court, we find out they need the help.
Obviously.
And then the ones that reach out before, I don't want them to go to court. I want them to get the help and get this resolved before it gets to court. So we're on the same page. We just can't.
And that's why I asked because I was hoping that you were seeing that, that we could talk about where we wanted it to go, and maybe this is as far as we can get.
It's been needed for a long time,
Yeah.
and it's good to see it coming.
Yeah. Okay. And so that's you got a
municipal
little cleanup thing
ordinance.
about some.
We got the cleanup
law
on the-
enforcement fund I didn't know about.
Yeah, that just changed under state law, so that was a cleanup issue. And then on the first page, the chart, it was a cleanup issue. The chart needed to contain all of our offenses, so that was another just technical cleanup. So you can go to one place and see them all on one graph.
Okay, so there's no change in what those fees are?
Nope, no change. It's just, when someone wants to go see what they are, they can see them on one chart now, so.
Councilwoman.
Thank you. Again, we're talking about so many moving parts, right? All of this, and this is, I would say the first 2 to 3 years, greatly experimental on how this is going to work. I think what all of this shows, though, is that every part of this, at least at this point, from what I can tell, is going to be needed to make the other parts, in some regards, work. And I would just say that, especially when it comes to the housing navigator. We know that it's needed. We know an additional position is needed. The other thing is what's going to be needed, which is what city manager has spoken of before, and many of us on council, is tracking data. We are going to need to track the heck out of all of this to see how effective and the changes that are happening with all of these moving parts. And I would say that's going to be more than in the lap of the housing navigator. It's going to be in the lap of whoever has their finger in this, tracking. And I think that it just begs for us also somewhere down the road to look at our computer system and what's needed there. But I digress. So moving on.
That's okay. Well, it's important, it's interesting, because Monique and her staff, and your guys have typically handed out a resource list with citations. And I don't know if it's automatic or if it's on request.
It's usually on housing requests. So sanitation, we're not. Weeds we're not, but for housing we are. And it's rather lengthy compared to the revised edition that Monique put out that would simplify it and help you find things quicker. But for sanitation, if you look at the letter that I've proposed to you, the first draft that I've done, there even gives suggestions in there I just gave you a sanitation letter because it would have turned into a whole lot of paperwork that doesn't make a difference. This gives you the concept of a revision of a letter. But it suggests, here are suggestions for sanitation of how to fix it without us fixing it.
Okay, and I haven't looked at that yet, but yeah, she's right. I mean, it's a whole network. I guess I'm thinking that Monique is now working on Rochelle from yet a different department, mailed out a new composite one that they've done that was longer than what you send out, and you probably don't want to send out that much, but as Councilwoman said, I mean, if somebody's real issue is they need more help from senior services to get benefits so they have money to eat, you know, then, and that's the solution to their, that is a great part of the solution to their problem, or medical needs, or mental health partnership. Some of those organizations now have navigators as well as counselors, making sure people are hooked up, you know, so that whoever this navigator is using the tenant landlord counseling services, the mental health counseling services, the senior citizen services, and so on, not just navigating for housing resources only. That's what it takes to really help those individuals.
Well, and Chair, you know how you're talking about different navigators for different agencies, just like there was with COVID, the way that huge team
Exactly.
came together, what you may look, so we break out of the silos, not just only within the city, but outside of the city, right? You can have a network of navigators
Well,
within
that's
these
in effect
different.
what they are. It's a
Yeah.
new term that everybody's
Yeah.
using, and I guess when Corey announces their model next week, we'll see how well that fits in to that model as well. So, it's all good. All right. So your change here really is to clean up and clarify some things, but to say,
Yes.
are going to pay court costs except it can be exempted.
If, for property maintenance offenses only under our code, if it is dismissed because it is cured by owner, like we do in 80% of the cases, that you can assess court cost, but the judge has the ability to waive it upon a showing of indigency or manifest injustice.
And we're certain that no LLCs will fit that definition.
I can't make any promises, but
Relatively certain. Or, you know, corporate owners that could. I mean, everybody,
And you
all
would
these
have-
are a judgment call at some
yeah,
point.
yes.
Okay.
And I would hope that as we move along in this, the judges would understand the importance of the initiative, and we know how many cases where charges were dismissed and the burden, added burden that can put on the city. So as everybody works together, that's going to be really important to know, to have that discretion and the importance of that discretion.
Yes, and
for
we
the
should be able to
judges.
get tracking numbers for all of that for you as well.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you all have been running a strong staff team, staff level interdepartmental team that has included the judge, so.
Yes,
This-
Judge
both of these have
Thadani
gone-
has reviewed both of these
Thought
ordinances.
so. Okay, just to make sure. City manager, apparently you had pre-scheduled this for November 1.
Yes.
Okay. What's your comfort level with us? I don't know that we've got time to have a meeting before then if we,
City manager can always ask for things to be on the agenda at your request. Obviously, you can't vote to put something on the agenda, so it
no,
would
we can't.
be at the discretion of you both on how comfortable you are with it.
I appreciate the time in this meeting. I think I'm okay with having it move if we can make sure that at least our two colleagues who aren't here have familiarized themselves and have weighed in. You're going to be here between now and Tuesday, right?
Yes.
All right.
No more vacation.
Would you prefer December 6th?
Have you got anything else on the rest of this agenda that you're wanting, that's a policy thing?
That would be the first time it appears on the agenda, December, you're talking changing to December 6th?
Well, now that you say that, the best question would be whether this is a big enough issue. Often, if we think there could or should be questions, we put items on for discussion only the first time out, and then for vote, then the following meeting. you were thinking that this would be a discussion, possible action, Anna?
If I may weigh in, when Karen Black was here and in research and working with Amanda, she did review this ordinance, since it has been a working draft, multiple times, and was very complimentary of the work that our legal team has done to put it together, since it is something that not a lot of different municipalities and local agencies have done. So from a energy standpoint, the council has been very enthusiastic about LLCs and making sure that we hold them accountable. All of the suggestions, including both ordinances, including court fines, was highly recommended and is part of the action plan. And from a bystander perspective, both are very reasonable and logical in terms of how they're being assessed and when they are or not actually applied. So even for a standard, court case or violation, it is recommended that we start charging fees because it does take city resources.
Absolutely.
And that's a strong recommendation from Karen Black. So our habitual offenders will definitely fall into a lot of those and will get caught up. And while we're working on the alternative path, Mike has been very in tune with the constituents that he works with to make sure that we're abiding by the low income and the medical hardships and giving them their due path until we are able to put a housing navigator in place. So it doesn't seem like one that I feel that your other governing body members are going to be very challenging of. And in fact, it could be a good way to get this ignited since the teams work so hard to get it put together.
Okay.
We've had a lot, I mean, she's right, we've had so much lead up to all of this.
We have,
A lot.
definitely. I just want to make sure we're not rushing it once it gets to the full council. Again, we had great reaction from the full council when Karen was here. They're eager to see things move as well. You just don't want to blindside anybody. November 1st is a week from today. They haven't seen it yet.
So what is your preference?
I'm really open to the sense of the group, so if you guys want to move it, I'm okay with that. We'll get feedback from the council. I'm somebody who's always holding out to make sure people have time to look at something and ask questions if they want to before it's time to vote especially, so.
Our only reason for November 1st was because you were pushing it, honestly.
Okay.
So, we cannot do it November 15th.
I wondered about that.
So December 6th would be the next available option.
December 6th will be a busy meeting, however, because you will be interviewing new council persons
Is that how
for
that
District
calendar
9.
is going to work?
Yeah, so the District 9 vacancy would be December 6th.
Well, if we can put it on for discussion and possible action, then we can take the temperature of the council, let them make that call. We'll know then with everybody there and just go.
November
For
1st.
what date?
The first week of
November 1st.
November. The first week of November, yeah.
I really hope we can check that person issue out and
Yes,
make a
I
quick
will
amendment if.
double check everything and be sure to do it. And since you don't have a quorum, I will take that feedback to the city manager so we can place it on the agenda.
All right,
So,
okay, let's see, two versions of this thing. Because I have three sets. There we go. All right, our item B3, retaliatory eviction. What,
stay tuned for November and I will get you a thoroughly vetted ordinance. It
okay.
has to
And
go
if that's
through.
too much of a rush, that's okay too. We just, again.
We've got
we're
one
talking about
drafted,
the-
it's going through prosecution, and then it's gotta go through municipal court, and then it's gotta go back to PD. There's just a lot of moving parts in all of this. We wanna make sure that it's able to be prosecuted and effective, so, we will get you a vetted ordinance by November.
Liz, are you live?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have a chance to check with the other two committee members about their availability for December meeting dates? Do we know when that meeting's going to be? Yeah,
I have sent an email and I have not received full confirmation from everyone yet.
okay. So we're looking
But I
at
can
either
go
the
check.
9th or the 16th, but that could be significant to people's timeframes. I was hoping we could settle that now, just so everybody knew.
Is that November 9th or 16th, is that, or
No,
December?
What I was
gotcha.
looking at was giving everybody time to work in November, get this first thing through the council in November, and then set them, but there's, with the holiday and with it already being the 25th of October, the difference between the 9th and the 16th could be significant in terms of people's time frame to
Gotcha.
work on things, that's all. But I guess we don't know, so.
I will stay tuned.
In general, what I had under section C was for staff to do an internal deadline of November 15th, so there was plenty of time in advance of whenever that, so the Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala and I had time to review it and then have it, any questions from us, and then have it ready in time for at least a week's notice out for the committee in December. So that's why that's such a short deadline. And if it's too short, I just need to know it's okay, but I felt like putting a date in would help us keep everything moving. So vegetation ordinance, you included that in our packet, so why don't you go ahead and introduce it?
Yeah, this is the ordinance that your committee asked drafted back a few months ago before mowing season. I don't know when the exact date was. And then also in your packets, I believe Liz sent out today, Councilwoman Nager, after the last time you had looked at it, had sent a recommended addition to the chairwoman. So on what is titled at the top, Nager Amendment, everything is as you drafted it last time. She just asked for a few additions of words dealing with native plant. So it is in red on page 1 are the only changes that the councilwoman had asked for compared to what you did. Otherwise, legal has not touched anything in it since you last looked at it. I believe it was on pause, and you had asked Mike to look at a couple things as well as utilities on acres.
What I wanted to do, and I have too many copies of all these, I'm sorry, is to look at this vegetation ordinance and talk about it long enough for us to identify issues that we might need to work on. I know that all along, well, now that we have this proposed additional language, again, I had thought that this one would be our primary work item at the December meeting, but to be ready for it,
I believe it was in your packets as a carryover from last meeting.
it was.
So.
And that's the one I've marked up. I know I have been given the new one, and I'm having a hard time putting, I know, I saw it. I was thinking that there might be some questions. Could you read the additional item, and I'll keep looking for my copy of it? Oh.
On page 1, the only addition was in line 26, where she adds the words flowers, comma, native plants, which is the addition, or other plants that provide food for consumption or the attraction and aid of wildlife. A native plant is any plant indigenous to the local ecosystem.
So I know Kevin Sieg, who got this put in, was worried about how it would go here. I mean, any plant indigenous to the local ecosystem. My lamb's quarter plants were 7 feet tall this year, growing out of my compost pile. You know, that's an indigenous plant, I guess. We had some arguments about dandelions a couple of years ago. Is there, I guess I'm thinking that, in terms of a transition, two transition considerations possibly, if we're going to allow anybody to have a fully wooded, overgrown with anything parcel, or a native plant yard that's overgrown, have you all discussed whether, not a fee or anything fancy, but whether we would keep a simple registration of those, possibly in CityWorks, so that there was a quick reference to somebody where we knew that they were, you know, you get neighbor complaints and things like that, that we knew that they had a native plant garden, and, or do we just wing it?
I wouldn't say it's wing it. I would say it's by inspecting the property. I mean, out of all of the native plant properties that have been complained upon, we've ran into one that the person argued that we were citing them for something that, one, out of the hundreds. And
Okay.
including on that one, there was an area that was not being maintained that was grass, that was over 12 inches. But it got cut down. But when you looked at the property, you didn't understand. So do we change an ordinance, start a registration for one property?
Well, because we're changing the ordinance, I think we have to think about how citizens will understand the rules are and what you all are gonna do, you know, how to manage the,
Sure.
the change.
We've worked with the extension, K-State Extension Office, and we've went to a native plant and noxious weed training. They were great. They provided us each inspector a book that was all laminated. You flipped to figure out, and it has helped because I've seen plants that are illegal. I'm drawing a blank on, but that.
Oh, that invasive honeysuckle or whatever
Yeah,
they were
well,
talking
but
about?
that's not in the ordinance, but a noxious weed. You know, and there's some weeds that look just like a noxious weed, but they're not a noxious weed, but it's the way the cone of the plant makes it the noxious weed. So you open it up and you go, okay, that's not a noxious weed, it's not 12 inches high yet. We're cool. It is a noxious weed, it's only 6 inches high, we can attack it, we can go after that. So that helps. It's never going to be easy when you start adding in gardens of native plants because they grow native, wild, down 7th and Jackson, when you see that, you know.
Well, they cleaned it up a lot.
Sure.
People didn't understand.
Right.
So it's a good example of.
But yeah, I'm using it as an example. It's very hard to tell what is a nasty uncultivated thing and what is a cultivated thing. And every individual has the opportunity for a hearing and they can contest it.
Okay.
So, and when we get to, or the letter, when we push for the hearing, you have that right to the hearing. It'll be more user-friendly where they can have a hearing if they disagree with us. But we've had one that argued.
Okay. I wanted us to address this briefly today. I appreciate that you included it so that we were ready, because if there did need to be some sort of an SOP on how we would handle that sort of situation, I wanted to ask you to work on it and bring it to us. But if you think we're okay with the existing,
There's a lot more properties than you realize that the people have gone to native plants all over this city. You don't think much about it usually because they look okay. They kind of look like a garden. So you're driving by and you don't realize what type of garden it is. So it's something we've been dealing with for several years, and only a few of them have we had to actually cite for being out of control.
and you've certainly dealt with a lot of overgrowth in North Topeka. You know, somebody could say, well, that's on purpose. I wanted that there. How do you deal with that?
Well, it's not a garden.
Okay.
It's
So-
not native.
What?
Well, it might be if it came up all by itself.
Well, I mean, if you wanted to argue, the grasses and weeds are native, they're growing. I didn't plant them, they're here because they're the native. I'm arguing, I'm not agreeing, I'm not telling you this is what I
But
believe.
this someone-
But these are the arguments that I face. And then I say, no, your grasses and weeds are over 12, these are grasses, we're going to mow them, you have the right to a hearing. No hearing officer's going to the stuff that Christina has excuse me, Councilwoman, but has to deal with in North Topeka is not what we're dealing, those people are in pure violation, no matter how they argue it. They can go to a hearing officer.
So do we have are we gonna have a list that we can present if needed for those ones that say, this is native? No, this is native.
I am definitely the wrong person to ask since I can't keep peace lilies alive, but Mike can maybe do that.
It has to be cultivated or a garden, and that's not
That's a good
cultivated.
definition. Yeah.
I mean, it's not maintained, it's running wild.
Right.
And most of those properties are properties where the person's walked away from it anyway. So there's nobody arguing with us when we're citing it in your area. Mine are gonna be those more eclectic artsy neighborhoods that decide that they're going natural and that they make the debate, I'm intending for this to grow the way it's grown.
Well, I have a neighbor, not right next door, so I won't define it any further, who likes every single volunteer tree that gets started in his yard and claimed that he liked it that way.
Sure. We've been through that too. And the new ordinance addresses those, so.
Okay, well, if you're comfortable with, you're the one who's on the front lines of that, and if you feel that adding this language is not going to make your lives more difficult, then Good. One of the other things we've talked about is those properties that aren't developed at all, that are shrubs and woodsy and so on, and what the right number is for the distance from either concrete, some sort of paved traffic way, or the easement.
I believe you had asked Mike to look at that last time.
I think,
I
I thought we
say
all
with
kind of
hesitation.
noted
We all, yeah,
at it
we all kind of
before.
agree that we need to talk that out, and we didn't talk it out, because I selected 30 feet because that's what we've been doing when somebody calls and says, can you give me a variance? I got this lot that I'm mowing for brome, it's also in the middle of a neighborhood. 30 feet has been adequate. Is it a set number? No, I mean, it could be 50, but then when we start getting 50-50, pretty soon you're mowing the entire acre, you know? 'cause
But
you
we
get-
have properties that, you know, we have issues with. I've just been watching ever since we started working on this, and what we do want is no overhangs over sidewalks. And it looks like you've got to be mowed at least 4 feet back from a sidewalk to just kind of naturally not have that overgrowth typically impinge on the sidewalk.
Right. So-
Otherwise, there are properties that don't have sidewalks that are overgrown all the way up to the street. And so it will be something that is going to impact people who always had it that way. We've got issues of people who let the utility easements get all overgrown, and you guys have been involved in some of that, but you know, this is where we know that stuff that we've let go for all these years is now gonna be an issue.
Yeah. So initially, I proposed it, I think it's page 234, subsection B. I'm the one that proposed to put it in the ordinance, and we did. I'm not opposed to striking it and placing it in policy that it would be the director's discretion if a variance is requested by a property owner, taking into consideration neighboring properties, fire hazards, maintenance of the property. We can add that into the SOP as long as it's, I believe it would be allowed. Because not everybody wants that variance. And a lot of people maintain theirs and they mow theirs, and others don't mow it at all, and they're not gonna mow the 30 feet. So we'll go ahead and we'll mow it and we'll bill them. So,
Well, but right now, you would have to go clear, you'd have to just do full clearance of trees, shrubs, and all sorts of growth to get some of these properties back, and I don't know that we want to take that
No,
on.
no, we don't.
Especially if doesn't matter that much how far back it is, as long as you can see around the corner.
if an urban forest has been established, we're not attacking an urban forest. You can't. That's tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, tens of thousands to do an average lot. So you have urban forests all over the city. And I don't know if there's a bad thing. I think that many of those are good things for our community.
Well, and for native plants and all the,
That's
you know,
right.
fresh air and so on, those are important. The deal is, what we do know is that we have all sorts of tree lines that have now grown up and gotten totally mature and out of control that we used to code before we quit enforcing this, made sure they were always cut. Now they're full grown. What are we gonna do? That kind of thing. And so a phase in, not only dealing with this 30-foot thing, but what's this, to change from what we've had to what this says is so major. Have you all looked at a phase-in plan? Because if we're gonna pass this, we should probably tell the public what we're expecting. If we also, similar to what we've talked about before, need to come up with some community-wide volunteer initiatives to help people just cut back off their fence rows and off their alleys and their yards and so on. And I don't know if we can do it in one season, how we want to phase it in.
That's a difficult question that I've been asking ever since we proposed this, of how we are going to address those. For the people that address it voluntarily, that is terrific, but for the people who elect not to, this is going to be a huge undertaking, one that I'm not staffed for, one that I don't have the equipment. I don't have a single piece of equipment right now to do this. So we don't even own a mower. My mow crew owns mowers, my mow crew owns weed eaters, they might own a chainsaw. But that's all that is assigned to my unit. To do this, when we need chainsaws, cherry pickers, and everything else, it's not there yet. That's something I've been asking, and it's gonna have to get phased, it's gonna have to be talked about. I do know that some people are gonna comply and it's gonna help, but looking at the easements in certain neighborhoods, if you look at High Crest, for example, we successfully got it cleared out within 2 years. It was back, and it's almost impossible to site it without actually walking every easement, because you can't see from the shed, the whatever else. So it's gonna be a hard undertaking for the city to enforce it.
Well, that's why if we're going for and, or yes, whatever it is, then we can say, all right, the city's not gonna do it, set that over there, how are we gonna do it?
So, one of the
It doesn't have to come from you.
No, but yes, no, one of the avenues we can take, well, we're the ones that are gonna be citing it, so it does have to come from me per se, so.
Well, you have to have something to
Okay,
say
so-
anyway, when you face it.
Right,
It's just gonna be a huge educational component too. You're gonna have to get partner other agencies involved. I mean, NIAs will need to, have their part in it because this is gonna be huge.
Okay, well, we've probably discussed it enough today, but I think that part of our homework to ourselves and anybody else that we'd want to engage prior to, if we recommend this out in December, it's got to have an implementation timeline with it.
You can also always task the city manager, like you do with all your ordinances, with implementing.
He was just about to leave, what do you
There you
say?
I don't know if we can have this for you in December, honestly.
And that's okay. The deal is, if we want to put this in place before the growing season next year, we all have to realize that there's going to need to be, and if it has to wait till year 3, we can talk about that, of course, and maybe we just already got there. But the issue is, we have to have thought through what we wanted to say, and have thought through the what ifs and the what abouts, and because we're all familiar between everybody, or amongst everybody, we're familiar enough, we can figure out the things that could go wrong, or that could be challenges, or that we're not staffed to handle ourselves, or that we're trying to get the city out of this business. Why the heck would we ever, take it on just for this change? How do we figure it out? But we're gonna need that corresponding action side, perhaps. Again, to be ready for the spring season, whatever we want to have in place, we really ought to have pretty well in order, and we'll scoot through the rest of our agenda because Councilwoman Valdivia needs to go. That's why I set the work month for November to get anything that we could have ready reported out in December, because if we want to take it to council in January or February, and if there are implementation plans needed, either just for you or for a volunteer initiative, we need to be telling people about it in January. Councilwoman Valdivia and I have committed to working at the neighborhood level over the winter too, to get people ready. We have to know what we're getting people ready for, so that we can, as much as possible, have it fly. So, thank you for those. You also brought today a letter. Did you want to go over it today, just briefly?
So with the letter, you guys have a copy of it. I brought all my stuff and somehow didn't bring the letters, but I can go over them if you can look at them. It's designed to be less aggressive, to be more team-oriented with the person, to partner them up. I'd like you to look that over and then come back with comments
Okay.
for me if you like it, if you would like any changes.
Mike, could you share this with communications?
I sent it to Liz and Hannah.
Okay, let's call timeout on this one. Okay. Let's run it through some channels internal before we send it to you for review.
Well, it's not a big deal to send it to us for review, and that we've had, a lot of comments on these things before. It wouldn't be final. I wouldn't consider it a big deal.
I'd rather we polish it first.
Okay. It's too late, Brett.
I got it in my grubby little hand.
What's that?
I said I have it in my grubby little hand right now.
Exactly. Okay. we'll be discreet. So we've got, we've got your vegetation text for December. Got the operating procedures we should go ahead and look over and have any comments for you in December or before then?
Sure.
The forestry ordinance is here. I considered that we would look at that with the vegetation ordinance, in that we also have to figure out the crossover between the ability for forestry over in public works to site and bill, as well as the corresponding ability for, now they only cite and bill if it's hanging over the right-of-way, but, just what their SOPs are, and then how that's going to interface with yours.
I think as briefly discussed at the last meeting, and then we did another round through to make sure
Okay.
there are no conflicts between the ordinance themselves. Whether or not the SOPs would need to be updated is a different question, but the ordinance themselves, the forestry ordinance, doesn't have any conflicts with the proposed changes.
There aren't conflicts, but but
They can mutually exist, I guess.
they can mutually exist. So, and what we've known since the beginning was there might be things that needed policy changes, but most things were procedural, interdepartmental collaboration if needed. If forestry can write somebody up on an easement or on a city street right of way because their tree is hanging over or is diseased, and they can abate it. But if it's a tree that shouldn't be there or a shrub that shouldn't be there in the first place, and code can write it up and can abate it, it seems a duplication to have forestry writing up to cut off the branches that are hanging over the alley if it shouldn't be there at all.
I believe those are operating procedural issues,
Right.
but forestry did not feel that any of their ordinance could be deleted, because then you will have issues
No.
where you can't address it. So the ordinances themselves can exist, and then it's a Travis and Mike question on the SOPs.
If that's it, but I mean, what I remember learning when we were going through these first processes was that they don't write up or ticket very often and didn't really have much of a collection process, whereas property maintenance did. With the overlap, it seemed.
It's probably a Hannah question.
So, yes, that is accurate in the sense that they haven't historically collected, because the city doesn't have an established ordinance or procedure to charge back when we, for example, drive down alleys and clear the overhang so that our vehicles can access those alleyways. So until an ordinance is more solidified or the intent behind it is done, there's no need for a robust billing system. They can leverage code. We are one city. They do work very in tandem with other departments. But there's no need to establish a robust billing system if we aren't going to bill back to constituents. So at this point, there's no need for changes based on the forestry component as we understand it. If that intention is changed by the committee and the intent behind the ordinance, and we now want to start charging individuals because they have a tree that's overhanging in their alleyway, we can look at where that revision comes into play from an administrative SOP standpoint, because we can still assess fines and fees through codes, billing systems, and processes. So there's nothing that prohibits us from being able to do that.
I guess for me, from the management point of view and as a policy person responsible for the policy piece, I don't want to be responsible for creating something that then is going to cost the city more money, where there's duplication of responsibility between two different departments and they're both operating in overlap.
Can definitely
So-
understand and respect that. As Mike stated earlier, quite frankly, code doesn't have the equipment to even begin to abate a lot of the forestry pieces. So there's not even truly a capability today operationally for them to overlap in terms of who's abating that component of it. From a billing software system, if that's the direction we decide to go, we can evaluate the different options. I would imagine, without knowing the details, there's not a hugely incremental cost to leveraging the systems we already have. There will be some to, just redefine it, but it wouldn't be a completely new installation from an operational standpoint. But the biggest thing is the policy, as you stated. If it's truly the policy that we want to reestablish charging these individuals for these particular services that forestry would serve the need for, we will visit that at that point. But per the ordinance, there's nothing that would have to change for us to really start moving forward with some of these pieces.
I guess it's chicken and egg, so that's the manager in me, is to pass it, and you don't want forestry, maybe somewhere along the way somebody decided not to do billings because it was cheaper to just go chop off everybody's branches and surprise them because of all the customer service that you all deal with in conversation just to do it. But if we let's take an alley, go down and forestry goes down and just cuts off all the overhang branches, and then code comes right behind them and writes up all the overgrowth that shouldn't have been there in the first place. We've got 2 trips from city staff. We've got a property owner who's going, what? And duplicate costs there. And
Is that really going to happen, though?
it should. I mean, I've got plenty of those where the forestries come and the people were surprised and this and that happened, and then ones that none of that growth should have been there behind the fence anyway. And because forestry has come regularly enough, at least in central Topeka, more and more people aren't taking care of the vegetation behind their fence because they think the city takes care of it, because the city has demonstrated that they would. And so people think it's not their job anymore. That's part of the change in the culture to turn around. And so somehow we do have to acknowledge that that's where we are and figure out a procedural system to educate and turn it around.
Which sounds to
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Councilwoman. This is Travis.
Hi, Travis.
Yeah, and so I've just been kind of listening. There will be some overlap. And why forestry never decided to bill or do that, I have no idea. That was before me. But I've been here 19 years and we've just always taken care of it. But going into the new vegetation, we would overlap. So in a situation like that, I would probably go look at it and then I would defer it over to Mike and his crew to site the property. Because why reinvent the wheel? Because I don't have the staffing, in the background set up for that, and code does. So that would just be something we'd all have to work out to figure out. But we don't just show up in alleys either. Somebody has called us for us to go to that alley. And we don't just pick one property and cut it back. While we're there, we just do that whole block. And so you're correct. I think a lot of people just assume we'll take care of it. The trash service just calls in and has us clear Blocks Valley to get them through with their trash trucks. So that's typically how we end up in an alley anyway, is because it has been reported typically by a homeowner that lives somewhere on that block, or the trash service reports it. So it's probably something that we all just need to get together and hash out a little bit. And I can do that behind the scenes with Hannah and Mike or whatever. So.
Awesome. That's why we brought it up. It's for real. I mean, I've actually had people who said, well, the city came last year. I don't know where they are, but so-and-so won't do the whole yard. I know the city will at least do that. And that's, people make their assumptions about what the rules are by what they see, right? Okay.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Travis. We'll put that on the agenda. Again, we'll have to let you know whether our meeting, I think it's going to be either the 9th or the 16th, and we'll let everybody know as soon as we get it set. The rest of the items on here, looking at, our understanding is that fire and property maintenance are working on that multi-unit inspection deal, so we thought just a report at the December meeting. Monique's working on the training plans as well as the resource lists. So what we were looking at was that if we could get those basic things done before the growing season next year, so between now and March, and quick feedback if you can now, that the vacant properties would be the next kind of chapter 2 on that, get these things out of the way and moving, and then we could really focus on all the different elements that go into the vacant property, you know, re-looking at the ordinance before, how what we're doing affects vacant properties, what we need to fully address them, Karen's recommendations as well. The tax sales, go ahead and address the tax sales at that point as well. Okay, wrap it up. So you all have that list in the agenda. We will, again, Hannah and Christina and I will get together and should have, by the end of November, something for everyone that's a consolidated task list. I've made reference to changing our, number 5, changing our culture property maintenance. We really had a great session. Over 230 yards got mowed that otherwise it appears would not have been. Other anecdotal things for us to learn. Had a great celebration and appreciated all the partners on the plaza and certainly the city's coordinated leadership from everyone on this call, as well as Greater Topeka Partnership and what turned out to be 8 private donors for the prizes for kids and adults at the event. Again, we will need to spend the time between now, ideally in January, with the prep up to March for next year. So again, dealing with the vegetation issue by December if we can, so we know what we're tackling to add to the mix next summer will help. Any questions or comments from the group before we break for now? With that, thank you all for all the pieces, and we stand adjourned.